The sea breeze carried the tang of salt and promise as Kara Jensen unloaded her board from the roof rack before dawn. The sky was still stitched in pale lavender and silver, a perfect prelude to the morning's first light. She secured her leash, slung the surfboard under her arm, and stepped onto the damp sand, each footfall leaving a brief imprint before the tide erased it. Her heart thrummed with anticipation. This was her sanctuary, the place she had driven across county lines to claim as her own. She paddled out beyond the breakers, feeling the cool water envelop her arms and chest like a welcome embrace. The surf was choppy but manageable, a lively playground for someone who had spent years honing her skills on gentler shores. As she bobbed atop the waves, waiting for the next set, she glimpsed movement on the shoreline. A cluster of seasoned local surfers silhouetted against the emerging light. Their boards, glossy with use, stood planted in the sand like sentinels guarding some unspoken boundary. Kara's shoulders tightened as she caught the flicker of sardonic smiles exchanged among them. She had heard stories of this beach's fierce territoriality, rumors whispered over coffee about newcomers who dared to carve their own lines in these waves. Yet she pressed forward, buoyed by a quiet conviction that the ocean held room for every rider. With a powerful kick, she launched herself toward the next wave, rising on her board like a dancer taking flight. Minutes later, as she paddled back out after a successful ride, she felt the sudden shove before she even saw the hand. The wave crashed over her, dunking her beneath the tumbling surf, and she fought instinctively to surface, lungs burning with salty water. When she broke through, coughing and blinking against the dawn light, she saw him, one of the locals, leaning back with a triumphant smirk on his face. Around him, others chuckled, their laughter curt and mocking. Anger surged through Kara's veins, sharp and electric, but she steadied herself against the swell. She kicked toward the spot where she had been cast aside, retrieving her board from where it floated nearby. Each stroke felt infused with resolve. She would not be driven off by a shove or a sneer. The water, after all, belonged to no single person. She found her balance again on the cresting waves, wiping the salt water from her eyes and scanning the lineup. The locals had returned to their early morning ritual, catching wave after wave, but now something in Kara had shifted. The shove had awakened a deeper determination. She would catch the next swell on her own terms, claim her space in this surf, and show them that courage, not conquest, defined a true rider. As the sun peaked above the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold, Kara paddled out once more, her strokes steadier and more purposeful. Behind her, the silhouettes of the locals paused mid-paddle, their attention drawn to the lone figure cutting through the surf. And in that sublime moment, board beneath her arm, eyes fixed on the open water, Kara Jensen knew that her morning ritual had become the first act of a quiet revolution. In the days that followed the shove, Kara's muscles ached in places she hadn't. Known could feel pain, a stubborn reminder of the night she'd been flung off her board into cold, tumbling waves. Yet each morning, no matter how stiff or sore, she found herself back on the sand before sunrise, board under her arm and determined breath fogging the air. The ocean greeted her with the same indifferent rhythm, waves cresting, crashing, and pulling back in an endless cycle, and she welcomed its constancy. She began to arrive even earlier, slipping into the water under a veil of stars so that when the first grey light of dawn crept above the horizon, she was already bobbing beyond the break, eyes fixed on the dark swell rolling toward her. The locals, who once jeered at her struggle, now regarded her with something halfway between bemusement and grudging curiosity. They paddled out in tight packs, surfing in unspoken formation, while Kara claimed a quiet lane at the far edge of the lineup, close enough to share their waves, but distant enough to avoid their pack mentality. At first, the waves seemed to mock her resolve. She wiped out more times than she caught a ride, her board snapping beneath her and hurling her headlong into froth. But with every dunking, she learned something new. How the current pulled, where the sandbar dipped, how to angle her shoulders to slice through a breaking wave rather than fight against it. Each failure became a lesson, each bruise a badge of persistence. One pre-dawn morning, as she sat astride her board waiting for the swell, the sea was unnaturally calm, like the eye of a storm. The clouds overhead were low and swollen, lit from within by a pale, diffuse light. She felt a thrill of anticipation and paddled toward a promising peak. The wave rose behind her, building from deep water into a perfect, rolling wall of glassy green. Kara angled her board, pushing with her arms until she felt the surge lift her forward. She stood, knees bent, arms outstretched, the yawa, and rode the wave all the way to the shore, the wind whistling past her ears as if cheering her on. On the sand, a few locals had gathered to watch. Their earlier arrogance had faded into silence, replaced by a quiet awe that spread between them like an electric current. Kara stepped off her board and shook the spray from her hair, breathing hard with exhilaration. One by one, the men tipped their caps or offered nods of respect. Small gestures, but enough to let her know that her solitary determination had not gone unnoticed. Encouraged by this subtle thaw, Kara began to push herself further each day. She paddled against stronger currents, challenged herself to catch waves farther out, and experimented with sharper turns. Slowly, with the ocean as her stern but fair teacher, she carved out her place in the lineup. The locals no longer elbowed her aside. Instead, they adjusted their trajectories to give her room, as though acknowledging, without words, that the sea belonged to anyone brave enough to face it head-on. By the end of that week, Kara's confidence had blossomed. She was no longer the newcomer who had been shoved into the surf. She was a rider in her own right, a solitary figure gliding atop the waves with a quiet grace born of persistence. And as the sun climbed higher each morning, casting glittering paths across the water, she knew that her true revolution had already begun, not in a single spectacular act, but in every determined paddle, every lesson learned in failure, and every triumphant ride toward our shoreline she had earned through sheer resolve. By midweek, Kara's solitary paddle-outs had begun to draw more than the curious glances of the local pack. After one pre-dawn session in which she'd ridden a particularly fierce set of waves all the way to the shore, she paused on the sand, chest heaving with exhilaration, and filmed herself speaking to the camera of her waterproof phone. Her voice was low and steady as she recounted the push that had set her resolve aflame, then described how every early morning paddle had strengthened her, not just in skill but in spirit. She posted the unedited clip on social media, captioning it simply, "Waves don't belong to one group. They belong to all of us." Within hours, the video had picked up traction. Comments began to roll in from women surfers in neighboring towns, some praising her technique, others thanking her for stepping up in a place they'd long thought off limits. By the next dawn, a handful of boards lay on the sand beside Kara's usual departure point. One by one, 4 brave women emerged from the dark. Their silhouettes pointed toward the rolling surf. Their greetings were shy at first, nods of acknowledgement, muffled hellos over the wind. But as the tide swelled, they launched themselves into the lineup beside her. Kara watched with warmth as the newcomers navigated their first few swells, cheering softly when they found their balance or wiped out with good-humored laughter. The local surfers, who had once jeered at Kara's solitary efforts, now eyed the growing women's contingent with a mix of surprise and unease. Onlookers gathered on the beach to witness the unusual scene. 6 boards slicing through dawn-lit waves in harmonious formation. Women who might never have met except for the solidarity sparked by one paddle-out. Over the next days, the crowd on the sand thickened. Friends of the original group of women video-called from distant beaches, urging one another to join the movement. By the weekend's first light, more than a dozen female surfers, of varying ages, shapes, and backgrounds, had assembled. They formed an archipelago of pastel boards bobbing beyond the breakers, voices drifting over the water in shared tips and laughter. When one rider caught a wave, the others cheered, their collective joy washing back to the shore like a second tide. That afternoon, Kara noticed a subtle seismic shift among the locals. The daily pack, once insular and territorial, now reconfigured its pattern to give the women room. No one spoke of banners or an organized protest. Yet the unspoken acknowledgement of equality rang louder than any sign could. Some of the older surfers, those whose pride had once manifested in bullying, now offered curt nods as they paddled around the women's group. A few even paused to exchange pointers about tricky swells or how best to lean into the drop. Word of the impromptu Dawn crew made local news. A human interest segment featuring split-screen footage of Cora's original post and the sunrise gatherings that followed. Viewers saw a revolution not of slogans and placards, but of surfboards, courage, and shared passion. Community members, parents, shopkeepers, cafe owners began to swell the beach galleries, offering supportive applause. Beneath their feet, the sand now held the footprints of every rider, local and newcomer alike, etched side by side in a powerful testament. When one woman claims her rightful place, she carves a channel for others to follow. And at Sunrise Beach, those channels were filling fast, carrying with them the promise of a waves reclaimed by all. The following week brought a sharp undercurrent of tension beneath the surface of Sunrise Beach's newfound camaraderie. As dawn light filtered through rolling clouds, Cara arrived to find the usual cluster of pastel boards replaced by a hastily posted sign nailed to a driftwood post. Non-resident surfers. Restricted permit required. The edges of the paper were damp, unpeeling, evidence that it had been stapled in the early hours before the tide could reclaim it. Beneath the bold type was a brief notice from the Beach Association, warning that anyone caught surfing without a local permit could face fines or confiscation of their board. A knot tightened in Cara's chest. She scanned the lineup beyond the breakers. A handful of women, some in wetsuits from distant zip codes, hesitated at the water's edge, uncertain whether to paddle out or heed the prohibition. The local surfers, who only days ago had grudgingly made room for them, now stood clustered in the shallows, arms folded, casting expectant glances toward the newcomers. A ripple of hushed conversation swept across the sand as lifeguards strolled by, their eyes flicking between the sign and the hesitant faces in the water. Determined not to be cowed by bureaucratic intimidation, Cara approached the nearest lifeguard station. The young woman in a red swimsuit glanced at the sign and then back at Cara, her expression tight. "We've been ordered to enforce it," she said quietly, as though sharing a secret she wished she didn't have to keep. They're worried about liability, beach capacity, insurance premiums, but most of us think it's a terrible idea. Cara's frustration flared. The lifeguard's sympathies gave her hope, but the official notice still stood between her and the waves. Word of the restrictions spread fast. Social media feeds filled with screenshots of the permit announcement and impassioned pleas from non-resident surfers unwilling to surrender their dawn sessions. Some locals applauded the measure, arguing that the break belonged first to the community that maintained it. Those who paid taxes, served on the beach cleanup committees, and supported the beachfront businesses year-round. Others, including cafe owners and vacation rental hosts, worried the permit requirement would dampen tourist dollars and fracture the fragile peace that had only recently begun to take hold. That afternoon, beneath a slate-grey sky, Cara convened an informal strategy meeting under the old lifeguard tower. 6 of the regular women surfers gathered in a loose circle on the sand. Cara outlined the problem. If the permit rule went uncontested, dozens of women from neighboring towns would be barred from the very waves they had helped transform. They needed allies, people with local standing, who could lobby the Beach Association to reverse course. They drafted a petition listing names of local business owners, lifeguards, and long-time residents who supported unrestricted access. Cara reached out to the cafe owner, who had once handed her a fresh cup of espresso after an especially brutal wipeout. He agreed to post the petition behind his counter and encourage customers to sign. The lifeguards whispered promises of discreet endorsement, offering to testify to the unscripted manner in which the women had improved safety simply by widening the smiles on the sand. A handful of families who regularly picnicked on the beach volunteered to canvass the neighborhood, gathering signatures door to door. Meanwhile, Cara penned a respectful letter to the Beach Association, laying out the unintended consequences of the permit rule. She described how the surge of female surfers had boosted morning foot traffic at local shops, how the collaborative atmosphere had reduced litter and vandalism, and how countless photographs of the inclusive paddle-outs had painted Sunrise Beach as a progressive, welcoming destination. She highlighted the risk that a permit barrier would not only push away enthusiastic riders, but also tarnish the beach's reputation in the broader surfing community. By week's end, the petition bore more than 300 signatures, far surpassing the threshold the association required for formal review. The cafe's petition clipboards were scrawled with names, residents, weekend visitors, and even a few skeptical locals who admitted they had signed just to see this all end without drama. Lifeguard supervisors submitted their testimonies in writing, citing improved watchfulness when more eyes were on the waves. Parents submitted anecdotes about daughters who found confidence in the water, inspiring younger siblings to follow suit. With the documents assembled, Cara delivered the petition and letters to the Beach Association's monthly meeting, held in the community centre overlooking the dunes. She sat among a packed audience of supporters, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the association's president called for discussion on the permit issue, Cara rose steady and clear-voiced. She spoke not only of fairness and equal access, but of the tangible benefits the expanded surfing community had brought. Cleaner beaches, fuller cafes, and a renewed spirit of shared stewardship. When she finished, the room was silent, save for the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the distant call of gulls outside the window. The association members conferred, glancing at the petition and the lined-up letters, each a testament to unity rather than exclusion. And in that decisive moment, Cara sensed that the tide of support had turned. The permit rule, once a looming barrier, was poised to dissolve, not by force of confrontation, but by the collective voices of a community awakened to the value of shared waves. The night before the scheduled paddle-out hummed with restless energy, as Cara lay in bed reviewing every detail of the plan in her mind. Dawn would arrive on borrowed courage and careful coordination, a sunrise gathering that needed every hand on deck. Before the first light, she would lead a caravan of surfboards down the winding coastal road to Sunrise Beach, each board stenciled with the words "Paddle Out for All." She imagined the driftwood canopy of the lifeguard tower, hosting a lineup of hand-painted signs proclaiming unity on the waves, staked firmly in the sand like flags of welcome. When morning's first rosy glow barely brushed the horizon, she met the cafe owner beside his steaming espresso cot. Together, they unloaded a stack of biodegradable flyers that read like love letters to the ocean. Equal access, shared stewardship, no permit needed to chase a wave. Lifeguards arrived next, hauling folding chairs and a weatherproof speaker, promising to keep watch over the gathering and play a low-key mix of island rhythms. A few families trickled in, carrying baskets of fruit and pastries. Breakfast for the volunteers who would marshal the beach entrance, guiding arriving surfers to the heart of the event. By the time the sun stretched its crimson fingers above the water, more than 100 surfboards lay in neat rows on the damp sand, pastel and bold hues mingling like a painter's palette. Neighbors and visitors clustered in small groups, greeting one another with hugs and bright laughter. The signs flapped in the gentle breeze. Waves for every rider. No shovebacks. Coastal community, open to all. Children ran between legs, drawing chalk hearts on the boardwalk and offering them to anyone who paused for a moment's gratitude. At the appointed hour, Cara climbed onto a borrowed paddleboard and called out for silence, her voice carrying across the hush of the ocean's lull. She thanked every volunteer, from the cafe folks who brewed dawn coffee, to the lifeguards who pledged safety, to the tenants who signed petitions and bore witness to change. Then, with firm determination, she led the first wave of paddlers into the water. Boards glided forward in a graceful procession, feet dipped in salt water, hands cutting through the swell in unison. Behind them, the crowd cheered as women, men, and even younger riders slipped beyond the breakers, carving arcs of solidarity across the dawn-lit sea. The paddle-out circle formed naturally, a living mandala of boards and bodies bobbing in harmony. In the center floated Kara, the first ripple of this movement, her eyes bright with tears and triumph. As the surf lapped gently against each board, the assembled group clasped hands and lowered their heads in a moment of grateful reflection. For access, for community, for every barrier washed away by the rising tide of inclusion. When they finally rose and paddled back towards shore, their laughter rang like church bells over the water. A coastal revolution, born not in rage, but in unity, bearing forward the promise of countless dawns yet to come. By mid-morning, the impromptu Paddle Out for All had evolved into a full-scale community festival. The sands of the Sunrise Beach, alive with a buzz that transcended mere celebration. As the last of the Paddle Out participants waded ashore, boards tucked confidently under their arms, they were greeted by a cheering crowd gathered behind the lifeguard tower. Children raced into their parents' open blankets, clutching seaweed-tossed leis that volunteers had woven overnight. Local musicians had arrived with acoustic guitars and a cajon drum, gently strumming island-inspired tunes that blended with the sound of the surf. Food trucks lined the edge of the parking lot, offering fresh fruit smoothies, savory empanadas, and steaming cups of coffee for volunteers and spectators alike. At the heart of the gathering stood the newly energized Beach Association members, many of whom had attended the petition meeting days earlier and now wore smiles of genuine pride. The association's president approached the makeshift stage, a driftwood platform decorated with pastel pennants, and tapped the microphone for attention. She spoke of how the permit requirement, though born of concerns over liability and crowd control, had overlooked the true spirit of Sunrise Beach, a place where every rider, whether local or visitor, had the right to chase the dawn. She announced the immediate suspension of the permit rule and introduced a new shared waves policy, which guaranteed open access to all surfers while laying out a voluntary contribution program to support beach maintenance, local lifeguard, training and ocean conservation efforts. Applause rolled across the sand like a soft wave. Lifeguards stepped forward to formally endorse the policy, pledging extra patrols during peak hours and offering free surf safety workshops open to every surfer, regardless of experience or residency. Cafe owners and shopkeepers presented symbolic checks from the Voluntary Contribution Fund, modest sums reflecting their gratitude for the patrons who each morning now help sustain a vibrant, inclusive surf culture. Even some of the staunchest permit supporters, moved by the morning's unity, took to the stage to express regret for their earlier stance and excitement for the beach's revitalized future. Meanwhile, Kara found herself surrounded by the women who had answered her early videos. Some blonde-haired, some wearing hijabs, some epically tanned by seasons of southern swells. Each one a testament to the movement's reach. They hugged and swapped stories of waves caught and boundaries crossed. A teenage girl shyly asked Kara to sign her surfboard, and Kara obliged, scrawling a simple message: "Ride your revolution." The girl beamed as if the signature were a lifetime achievement award. As the sun climbed higher, surfers returned to the water, carving bright arcs on glassy faces of waves they now shared without question. Onlookers cheered each ride, photographing every joyful collision of board and swell. The musician's set shifted into a rhythmic chant about unity and the ocean's boundless invitation. Children darted between legs, offering stickers from the Contribution Fund's promotional pack. I paddle out for all. In the afternoon's gentle warmth, families picnicked on dunes restored by a volunteer cleanup organized earlier that week. Another initiative born of Kara's leadership. Environmental educators staffed a tent offering lessons on marine ecology, explaining how a healthy coastline depended not only on human unity, but on preserving sand dunes, tide pools, and seagrass beds. A group of local artists unveiled a mural painted on an upcycled shipping pallet, depicting a circle of surfers, male and female, young and old, paddling toward a rising sun emblazoned with the words "shared waves, shared future." As dusk approached and the festive crowd thinned, Kara stood at the water's edge, watching the horizon burn in streaks of pink and orange. She reflected on how just days ago she'd been shoved unceremoniously into a wave, an unwelcome outsider. Now she witnessed a revolution that had rippled far beyond her solitary determination. A revolution born of inclusion rather than exclusion. In that luminous moment, as the final paddlers rode a last set of waves into the glowing surf, Kara realized that the coastline had been transformed not by policy alone, but by the collective act of standing together in the water, each paddle stroke, reinforcing the promise that Sunrise Beach, like every shore, was truly a place for all. Months later, Sunrise Beach had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and wholly transformed. On any given morning, the shoreline was alive with a mosaic of color. Surfboards of every hue lined the rack by the lifeguard tower, while riders in wetsuits and board shorts drifted beyond the breakers like a flotilla bound for adventure. The once inscrutable local pack now blended seamlessly with newcomers, their laughter and conversations floating on the salt breeze like music. The permit station stood empty, its windows shuttered and repurposed as a bulletin board festooned with flyers for surf clinics, ocean cleanup days, and weekend potlucks at the community center. Kara Jensen arrived before sunrise as she always did, paddleboard in hand and heart lifted by the gentle swell of anticipation. She passed familiar faces, parents guiding their toddlers atop foam boards, a group of retirees practicing gentle balance, a handful of teenage girls comparing wave forecasts on a phone screen. She paused to greet the cafe owner, who had set up a small coffee cart on the boardwalk. His daily ritual of free morning brews for all now extended to include protein bars and fresh fruit bowls donated by local grocers. He smiled and slid a steaming cup into her hands with a silent nod, honoring the unspoken partnership that had become the lifeblood of the beach community. Out on the water, Kara caught sight of a tiny figure paddling in the shallows. A 7-year-old named Maya, who had first toddled onto the sand with her parents during last summer's paddle out. Today she balanced astride a child-sized board, her small arms paddling with determined enthusiasm. As Maya hesitated at the crest of a gentle wave, Kara paddled closer and offered an encouraging thumbs up. The girl's face lit up, and in a moment that felt timeless, she launched herself forward, letting the swell carry her the final few yards to shore. Her triumphant grin, radiant and fearless, echoed the spirit that had first driven Kara to confront those territorial shoves. Back on the beach, families lazed on blankets beneath open umbrellas, sipping smoothies from the non-profit cafe stand, and chatting about upcoming fundraisers for a new surf scholarship program. A pair of instructors from the morning surf clinic led a group through safety drills near the lifeguard tower, their voices calm and authoritative as they demonstrated paddle techniques and emergency procedures. A banner overhead proclaimed the program's mission: every child a chance to ride the wave, every wave a lesson in courage. As the sun climbed higher, casting diamond dust reflections across the water, a local artist unveiled a permanent mural on the side of the snack shack. It depicted a circle of riders, men and women, children and elders, surrounded by the words, "Our waves, our community." The unveiling drew applause, and Kara, standing among the crowd, felt a swell of pride that matched the ocean's own tides. She thought back to the solitary morning she had once known, when a shove into the surf was a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Now those tests had been transmuted into traditions of shared respect. Sunrise paddle-outs open to all, monthly stewardship cleanups, joint safety workshops. Later, as the afternoon light softened into that golden glow, surfers called magic hour, Kara climbed onto her board once more and paddled out beyond the break. Around her, a dozen riders glided in a loose formation, grinning and exchanging waves of acknowledgement with each other. She caught a rising swell, popped to her feet and rode it towards shore, the board humming under her feet like a faithful companion. When she dismounted near the water's edge, she was greeted by cheers from the onlookers, an everyday affirmation of how far the beach had come. With her toes in the wet sand and the late-day breeze tugging her hair, Kara watched the last of the riders head in, their silhouettes etched against the horizon. She took a slow, deep breath of salty air and felt the gentle ache of gratitude in her chest. The revolution she had sparked with a solitary paddle had grown into a living, breathing community, one where every wave caught was a testament to solidarity, every shared sunrise a promise kept. And as the sky shifted through shades of pink and gold, Cara knew that Sunrise Beach would carry this spirit forward, dawn after dawn, tide after tide, for generations to come.